Good morning. Good to see everyone here. A teenage boy just got his driver's license. So he begins to talk to his dad about the use of the car. So the dad thinks about this for a minute and decides, all right, you get your grades up to a B average, you study the Bible, and cut your hair, and then we'll talk about use of the car. So the son contemplates this and says, all right, I'll do that. So after a period of time, the father comes to his son and says, son, I see you've gotten your grades up. I see you studying the Bible. Why haven't you cut your hair? So the son says, well, I've been studying the Bible. And I found that Samson had long hair. And I found out that John the Baptist had long hair. And you know what, Dad? It's likely that even Jesus had long hair. To which the dad replied, did you also notice that they walked everywhere they went? Change often comes about through circumstances beyond our control. And that's what we're going to talk about today is change. Why? Because change is uncomfortable. Why is change uncomfortable? We are resistant to change because it brings about uncertainty, a fear of the unknown. It also brings out a lack of control. We no longer have control. It can change our standing among our peers, or at least a perceived standing among our peers. We may feel devalued or belittled. And there's a sense of loss. We like the way things are. It's in our nature. Change is uncomfortable, but often necessary. Also, change is about something more than ourselves. It's something greater than ourselves. But we take it personally. Because when we have to change, when we find out something about ourselves, we feel that we are less important, or I wasn't good enough in some manner. But we need to keep in mind that change, at least in the church, is not about me, it's about God. Look at the disciples. Their world was turned upside down. Their status in life was not increased, but they served a greater purpose. They kept the big picture in mind. Also, change is often exaggerated or sensationalized. We tend to overreact and exaggerate and come up with consequences that often never materialize when faced with change. I'd like to read an excerpt from a letter to President Jackson. Mr. President, railroad carriages are being pulled at an enormous speed of 15 miles per hour by engines which, in addition to endangering the life and limb of the passengers, roar and snort their way through the countryside, setting fire to crops, scaring the livestock, and frightening women and children. The Almighty, notice he spiritualizes it, the Almighty certainly never intended that people should travel at such breakneck speed. Did you notice the use of adjectives? And as I pointed out, kind of spiritualized it. That was written by the governor of New York, Martin Van Buren. We tend to emphasize the negative. We blow it way out of proportion, and often it never comes to fruition, and we ignore the big picture. One thing I learned, because let's face it, in life, we go through change. I've learned that change is a constant. In scientific principles, a constant is something that's universal and perpetual. Change is a constant, and yet we resist it. Normally when we go to work, what's the biggest thing people complain about? It's change. Some new mechanism or some new policy or something has come out that the company has mandated, and it requires a change. And you know the story. It was always better the way we did it before. And we have to accommodate the change. You know, Raytheon is no different. It's a big company, you know, and they rolled out this new system. This new system has tons of capability. It is a good thing. When it is fully utilized, it will do a lot for us. But Raytheon is a huge company. So they sucked in all this data, but they didn't go through and process each information and use the tool to the best advantage. So everyone hates this tool. It's a new tool. It allows them to get the information they got before just as well as they did before, but it has a lot more capability that will be utilized, that will be realized more in the future as new programs really embrace it for all its power. But I think I am the only one that points out the positives of this tool, at least that I know of. But no matter the changes you go through at work, no matter the complaining and grumbling that you do, you rarely quit your job, right? Change is also part of our personal life. You know? Friends come and go. The house just isn't what it used to be. For that matter, neither am I. I'm sure none of you deal with that. We get older, things change, our circumstances change, and we adapt our activities, but we don't quit living. We keep going. So why do we look at change in the church any different? We tend to look at changes in the church. We tend to respond negatively to changes in the church when we don't do so in other aspects of our life. In fact, the Restoration movement was an attempt to kind of overcome this. You know, the churches had divided. They'd split over a lot of different things. And the Restoration says, hey, let's try to be the body of believers that God intended us to be. Let's unite on God's word. But now, do we really act any different? Spiritual growth, change, is something that should be encouraged in the church. You know, we talk about life change. We talk about a new creation. We talk about transformation. We talk about all these great things that Christ can do for you. And we can talk about those words very affectionately and flamboyantly when we're talking about you. The problem comes in when it's about me. It's easy to talk about other people, but the church and change is about me. Let me just take a little self-assessment here. Think about where you are spiritually today. Think about where you were spiritually a year ago. Have you grown? You can relax, I'm asking rhetorically. But the answer, if you are not growing in Christ, why not? Might be because you're resisting change. Change that you should be embracing. You see, rather than deal with the change that I need to make, again, it's easy to talk about changes you need to make. But when talking about the changes that I need to make, it is much easier to focus on something else. The worship style, the music style, money, appropriate footwear. You see, those are all things that we can focus our attention on rather than dealing with me. And we'll spiritualize those things, right? Well, that worship style, I just don't feel led. Or I don't feel like I'm growing. I don't feel like it's feeding me. Or, music. Music is a big one. I don't know why, but it is. But music, they played bluegrass music. Next thing we know, they'll have moonshine in the communion cups. We justify it, we rationalize it, and we spiritualize it to ignore the issue of dealing with me and changes that I need to go through. So as we do that, we do the biblical thing. We start talking to someone that agrees with our position and affirms our position and builds us up in our position. Let's see, that term is what? Gossiping? Yeah, that's it. That's a good thing, right? That's right in the fruit of the Spirit list. And then that builds a faction. And then what do? We blame the minister. All so we don't have to deal with me. I came across this list. 12 reasons why the preacher quit attending sporting events. Number 1, the coach never came to visit me. I think I've shared this story with some of you before, but in my previous church, we had a lady in the hospital. And when she got out of the hospital, she was upset because the church did not come to see her. She was upset. The elders went to talk to her. They asked her, well, who came to see you? Well, so-and-so came to see me, so-and-so came to see you. And she listed off several people from the church that came to see her. But the preacher didn't come. Therefore, the church did not meet her needs. The church is more than a preacher. We're all part of the church. And we should minister and feed one another. Number 2. Every time I went, they asked for money. Number 3, the people sitting in my row didn't seem very friendly. 4, the seats are hard. We got padding now, but pews at least have a backrest. Those bleachers are hard. But anyway. Here we go, number 5. The referees made a decision with which I did not agree. Now, you probably don't know this, but I'm a Packer fan. And I've watched a lot of Packer games. And I've seen a lot of calls that I disagreed with. But surprise, surprise, I didn't quit being a Packer fan. I was sitting with hypocrites. They only came to see what others were wearing. I really struggle with that one. Some games went into overtime, and I was late getting home. Oh, man, the Baptists are going to beat us to the restaurant. Here we go, number 8. The band played some songs I didn't know. The games are scheduled on my only day to sleep in and run errands. My parents took me to too many games when I was growing up. I read a book on sports, and I feel I know more than the coaches. Now, we know that's an excuse. Knowledge is nothing if it doesn't have application. If you have knowledge, share it and help others grow. But again, it's about doing life together, and it's more about application than what we know. Number 12, I don't want to take my children because I want them to choose for themselves what sport they prefer. So given that change is a constant and change occurs in the church, how should we address change in the church? Well, I thought I'd go to the words of Jesus. In the Upper Room Discourse, John 13, chapters 13 through 17, Jesus is given his final farewell to the disciples. Chapter 13 starts out with Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Chapter 17 ends with the high priestly prayer. And then following this, Jesus is crucified for us. So in those chapters, I did some analytics, and the word love is used a total of 34 times. Now, 31 of those times in 18 verses is the agapao love. That's the unselfish, sacrificial love. You know, we tend to look at love as a strong like. You know, I like you. We call that love. That's not the love that Christ is talking about here. The love that Christ is talking about here says that I love you even if I don't like you. It says I love you anyway. I love you unselfishly and sacrificially. Love is what drives change in the church. You know, think about it when you met your spouse or your kids. As you develop that love for them, it goes beyond just liking them. It goes beyond the warm, fuzzy feelings. Because you love them even when they disappoint you, when they hurt you. Or when they lose their train of thought. But you continue to love them, and you love them regardless. It's the same way in a church. We need to choose to love one another. And sometimes to drive change, part of the reason why we're better as a community is because we can see things in other people's lives that they themselves don't see. And part of what we're called to do as a church is to point those things out to those that we love so that they can grow closer to Christ. And vice versa. It's not just a one-way street. So whether you like them or don't like them is irrelevant. But I think sometimes it's easier to show love to someone in the church that you don't like. Because, let's face it, our human nature, we're quick to point out something that they're doing wrong. But you know, in some ways, it's that person that you like, that friend of yours, that you are hesitant to point out something in their life because you don't want to risk that friendship that you have. And if you think about it, that's not really showing love to your friend. That is allowing your selfish feelings to govern. So, to get back to the time that Christ used love, in 6 of the verses he used love. He states that love is obedience. As an example of this, let's look at John 14:21 through 24. He who has my commandments and keeps them is the one who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and will disclose myself to him. If anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him. And we will come to him and make our abode with him. He who does not love me does not keep my words, and the word which you hear is not mine, but the Father who sent me. There's a conditionality to love. Dr. Miller once said, "It is a great deal easier to do that which God gives us to do, no matter how hard it is, than to have to face the responsibilities of not doing it." Also, in 6 verses, Jesus shows us that love is sacrificial. As an example, John 13:34. "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another even as I have loved you, that you also love one another." How did Jesus love? It was sacrificially, to the point of giving his life. And it was with humility. When he washed the disciples' feet, that was the lowliest of servants' jobs. Yet he did it. So as an example, that's how we are to love. Where do we draw the line in serving others? I would put to you that if there's a line at all, it shouldn't be there. Also, I want to read John 15:13. "Greater love has no one in this than one lay down his life for his friends." We like to quote that a lot. That gives us comfort. But I'll put to you, I think it gives us comfort for the wrong reasons. I think we look at that verse selfishly. God loved me so much that he died for me. That's true. But I think we miss the point. I think we should view it as sacrificial. Christ was our example. Am I willing to be enough of an instrument of God's love that I am willing to lay down my life for you? My life is not my own. Do we have that greater love? Leo Tolstoy said this: "Everybody thinks of changing humanity, and nobody thinks of changing himself." Christ demonstrated love. The early church, we were talking about it last week in Sunday school, demonstrated love. Think of our testimony if we truly demonstrated love. Next, love is unified. As an example, let's look at John 17:22 to 23. "The glory which you have given me, I have given to them, that they may be one, just as we are one. I and them, and you and me, that they may be perfected in unity, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them even as you have loved me." Love and unity is exemplified in the Godhead, the Trinity. That same love and unity should be present in the church, the body. In fact, again, in Sunday school, we've been going through Acts, and we've been talking about community. There's unity in community. That's what we're called to do. So as Christ demonstrated, as Christ taught and demonstrated, love is to be obedient and sacrificial. And unity is a result of that. A drunk was stumbling through the woods. He came to a river and started stumbling through a river, and he came to a preacher who was baptizing. The preacher said, "Do you want to find Jesus?" And the drunk said, "Yeah." So he dunks him under and pulls him up. "Brother, did you find Jesus?" "No, I didn't find Jesus." The preacher was kind of startled, so he dunks him down again a little longer. And he pulls him out and said, "Brother, have you found Jesus?" And the drunk says, "No, I've not found Jesus." This really kind of confuses the preacher. So he holds him down again, and he holds him down for about 30 seconds, and the drunk starts squirming and stuff, and he pulls him up, and he says, "Brother, please, have you found Jesus?" And drunk says, catches his breath and says, "Are you sure this is where he fell in?" It's all about our perspective. Our perspective drives our attitude. If we are to embrace change, the change that comes from the gospel, to become Christ-like, our attitude has to be one of seeking Christ in our life, of dealing with that issue of me, not you. In a sense, to love is to change. We resist love for the same reasons we resist change. It makes us uncomfortable. There's a loss of control. It requires humility. But that's what Jesus demonstrated. So how should we deal with situations that arise in a church when our feelings get hurt? Or when we think it should be done another way? Or when we're asked to do something that we just don't feel comfortable doing? So how does the love of Christ that we talked about, the resistance to change that we talked about, how does that translate in how we live it out here in church? We've called RK to be our minister. We're all looking forward to that. We're excited about it. But a few months down the road, somebody's going to say, I don't like that. Or, boy, that just isn't right. He was wearing sandals up there. There's going to be something that we don't think is right, or that hurts our feelings, or whatever. So how should we deal with that in the church? Here's my suggestion, which I hope you'll take to heart. First, ask yourself why you feel that way. And while you're asking yourself why you feel that way, pray about why you feel that way. Then ask yourself, what does love require of me? And I'm going to suggest to you that you do those three things for at least a week. But then if you still feel that something needs to be said or done, then talk in love with the person with whom you have the disagreement. We all like to think we're right. And if you want to know if you're right, just come and ask me. I'll help you out. I'll let you know. But change is about looking at ourselves, addressing me. You know, a couple years ago, I would have argued vehemently and very scripturally on certain things that I disagree with now. Why? Because I was forced to confront that issue, look at it from a different perspective, and come to realize some things. That's growing. I'll get back to that little self-assessment. Where were you a year ago? Have you grown? Christianity, love, is about growth. It's not about the status quo. The status quo is a no-go. We are to grow. We are to transform. We are to bring about life change in ourselves and in others, individually and as a community. So again, when something happens, and your feelings are hurt, or we never did it like that before, ask why you feel that way. Pray to God, why do I feel this way? Ask yourself, what does love require of me? Now that's in your notes. You know, think about that and pray about that. Hang that on your fridge so 6 months from now, when your feelings are hurt, you can look at that and give it a shot. And let me know if it works. I think it will, but, you know. So that's what I'm asking us to do. You know, I look forward to having RK as our preacher. And I want to say, I want to thank you for the opportunity to stand before you and preach the word. I appreciate that opportunity. But now is our invitation time, so if people will come forward. But now that RK is coming, we are entering a transition time, a time of change. So ask yourself, when things happen that we don't necessarily care about, I'm going to choose love. I hope you do too.